In this episode of Beyond the Horizon, Enable Head Nerds Joe Ferla and Lewis Pope sit down to unpack the cloud security challenges MSPs face and how to turn them into business opportunities.
Everybody has to ask that question when you move something to the cloud. How do I do this securely? How do I make it secure even though it's in the cloud? And that has been a challenge for a lot of people.
Hi, my name's Joe Ferla. Welcome back to the Cloud Management for MSP series we've been doing in podcasts. We had our first episode with Stephanie Hammond talking about how we can look at adjusting our packages and products to look at accommodating as we move to the cloud as an MSP. Our second episode, should you like to see it, was with Ben Lee. Discussing why Microsoft. What do they bring to the table as we're migrating to the cloud? Why should we be looking at them? What are some of the things we may have missed in the Microsoft family as MSPs that we should be looking at utilizing? And I'm happy to say for our third episode, we're going to bring in Lewis Pope, the Enable security head nerd, arguably the smartest person here at Enable, to go over some of the gotchas we're going to see in the cloud and how we can start to adjust the services we offer. You heard me, Stephanie, and Ben talk time after time about how MSPs sell productivity and peace of mind through the lens of cybersecurity. And moving to the cloud, that becomes a huge risk or liability that we're taking on. And who better to talk to it than Lewis Pope? So, Lewis, I'll give you a couple minutes to introduce yourself, let the crowd know who you are, and then I've got a slew of questions to rapid fire in your direction.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Ferla. So for anybody who's not had the luxury of hearing this accent before, I'm Lewis Pope, one of the head nerds at Enable. Been in the MSP space for about 14, 15 years at this point. Been on both sides of the fence. Been on the MSP side and on now the Enable side for the past 7 years. And whenever I say I talk about security and focus on security, it's very much practical implementation, best practices, the dirty work of security, the challenging things that need to get done, even though that they aren't always appreciated.
Yeah, and I think with MSPs, this is something that we kind of take as a given. You know, we've been working in physical environments for a very long time. Security is second nature to us. And a lot of those behaviors transfer really well to the cloud. But you mentioned like getting into the nitty gritty and getting deep and dirty. I think in the cloud that happens a whole lot more than what we were used to as traditional physical environment management. Is that a misconception that I'm having, or how does that fit into your world?
No, it's that's the journey everybody from the beginning of, okay, let's start moving our workloads to the cloud. There was the next question of, well, okay, now that we've moved it to the cloud, how do we make sure that it's secure in the cloud? And there have been better and better answers for that built over the years, new processes, new standards, new tooling, new approaches. But everybody has to ask that question when you move something to the cloud. How do I do this securely? How do I make it secure even though it's in the cloud? And that has been a challenge for a lot of people because, it is not physical. It's not the workstations and the servers and the network appliances that you can lay your hands on anymore and you have full control over everything. It's a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service where you can't control all the dials and the knobs, and you have a whole new ecosystem of new security controls and best practices you have to learn. So everybody has to go through it. Some people are lucky, and whenever they have to get to that, they're either part of an organization that already has established process and procedures and protocol around it, and it's an easier transition for you. But if it's no, you're going into it for the first time and somebody's asking you to figure it out, you're absolutely in that situation of, okay, I'm in a new place, new surroundings, new rules, and I don't know any of them. Where do I start?
Yeah, and to kind of build off of that, we're talking about security very generally here. And we know it's a given in the MSP space, but what should we be providing for cloud security? I think we can all understand something like an EDR tool is a need, a DNS filter is a need, backup and recovery is a need. But jumping into this new environment and jumping into this new world for all intents and purposes, what else do we have to be aware of? What's needed for providing cloud security?
So there is, well, what are you moving into the cloud? It's going to dictate a lot of the, answers here. If all you're doing is, spinning up some Microsoft 365 workstations in Azure, you're still going to kind of treat those the same way that you would have your regular endpoints. You're going to install an EDR on it. You're going to subscribe it to some content filtering or DNS filtering solution. You're still going to be monitoring it like you would a physical box, but you're just adding on top of it that you now have to protect it at a one level up. You need to protect whatever the hosting environment is, making sure that you have identity management in place, some type of mechanism on the identity plane to validate and verify whether someone should even be allowed to get in and access an asset. Are the principles of zero trust. So, are we going to take that need to make sure that somebody has access and restrict it down to conditional access controls that are being handled by Intra ID for you? And then there's your platform, getting away from your platforms as a service to your software as a service, your cloud hosted solutions with web portals that allow you or your customers to uh, you know handle their workloads. How do you secure that? That one's going to be heavily done by identity management, making sure that, again, you're monitoring who is logging in with what credentials, um, uh, checking for impossible travel, unusual behavior from the user logging in at unusual times, those types of things. But you can start grouping all of these things into kind of a few things. There is the identity management plane, which is, that one extends over cloud and local now, because you have, like with Intra ID, that's handling everything you're logging into from everywhere. So that's a common, on-site concern now. It extends out to the cloud very easily for that. But then there's other things like cloud security posture management, cloud workload protection platforms, cloud infrastructure entitlement management, cloud native application protection platforms, CNAPs, cloud access security brokers. Those are all different, categorization and grouping together of common um, controls that are, directed towards a common need, a common outcome that's being desired there. And each one of those has a different reason to exist, and some of them are you need to have these no matter what. The identity management plane, having that eye on logins, unusual login activity, that kind of stuff. That's kind of table stakes now for MSPs. MSPs need that capability across the board for your Google workspaces, for either Intra ID, or if you're using the AWS AIM option, you need to have that nowadays as an MSP. The other ones, though, like cloud security posture management, you don't need to do that unless, of course, you have clients that are moving those types of workloads out into the cloud. Um, and I think that's another important thing that a lot of MSPs miss out on, is knowing if those kind of line of business applications or systems exist in the first place. I've talked with a lot of MSPs and even myself back in the day. You will have clients, shadow IT is a thing. Well, they're using a solution, a service, and they never bother to let you know that they're using it. Yet it's, on which half of their business relies. And a cloud security posture management is something you absolutely should be helping them with there on something like that, making sure that it is set up securely, that the logins are being monitored and managed, that somebody somewhere at some point has reviewed it and said, yes, we have disabled the public IP admin dashboard access. You have to access the admin dashboard from behind these IP addresses. Only these users have these certain proper permissions, segmentation of duties, those types of things. There's a lot in the cloud that absolutely positively can be missed if it's not something you've been doing, if it's not something you're familiar with. Um, you miss your If you don't know what you can do, you're obviously not going to see the opportunities to do those things.
Yeah, and some of this seems to be, I think, pretty self-explanatory, right? You talk about the identity management, you talk about application management and that type of deal. And I don't want to say that that's something new to MSPs. I think what I would say the new thing is the focus that we have to put on that. Where if you're managing the veterinary hospital or you're managing the lawyer's office or the hospital, you're still going to have that same level of identity access just because your footprint is expanded so much. There'll be, I think, varying levels of, say, security risk, but the management still seems to be there.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
question here comes into, with MSPs, we've always been very tight knit in our use of tools, right? You see MSPs who like to brag, I'm a ConnectWise shop. I am an Autotask shop. I am a Enable shop, right? Where we do try to kind of maintain that single pane of glass, and we do tend to consolidate under one vendor for ease of billing and usage and that kind of deal. When you're talking about the security, you were mentioning just what seems like a multitude of new vendors. How does that play in to this migration to the cloud? How, as an MSP, can I make sure that they're as secure as I want to be? Does that kind of make sense? Like,
Yeah.
where does that wrinkle come into play, and where can I confirm or gain that trust of these vendors?
Right. So there's always the scope. In MSPs, depending on where you are in your journey as an MSP, and you're going to have different levels of comfort, different levels of programs built out around, even, just, physical endpoint services. You're going to have different levels between different MSPs, between different risk profiles of clients. And, sticking to a particular vendor stack for your MSP solutions, convenient, great, lots of reasons why you should do it. But some MSPs kind of, uh, they misstep, and they rely completely on just that one set of solutions from that one vendor. And they build up around it, they get really proficient around it, and great, they're awesome at it, taking advantage of it, but there's still things that it doesn't touch, that doesn't take advantage of, and take care of. And there are some MSPs will take that as okay, that's a line for us, that's outside of our scope. We don't have the time, the labor, the skill set, we don't want the risk or liability exposure, so everything on the other side of it is going to be not our concern. And the same thing, that happens with internal systems, and the same thing happens with the cloud. There are those lines where MSPs will say, this is where I'm comfortable at. This is the line that I'm comfortable to go up to. Past that, yeah, we're not geared for it. And then it's do I outsource it? Do I just tell my clients that it's not what we do? Do I tell my client that it's not a concern? Um, but the problem, the issue is still there. It's still unaddressed. That still represents, if nobody's taking care of it, it represents an expanded attack surface, a weaker security stance, which is by some probably definable measure statistically increasing the likelihood that there will be security events in an environment. Um, but with an MSP, when you're going through this journey, there is the fear and apprehension. Uh, Fear and apprehension is one of the things driving you back from that line of we don't want to do that. And then there's other things of, well, I don't think that the margins are there. I would gladly go do this if I thought it was worth my time and we could make good margins on it. And I mean, for that one, that particular one, I'm like, no, there are good margins to be made on it. And even if there weren't good margins to be made on it, and all you were doing were, you know, washing on it, it would still be worth doing because it's reducing your clients' risk exposure and your risk exposure. But with the whole thing of needing to be able to address this as an MSP, regardless of what, at what point in your journey you are at, I always think it's better to go ahead and consume it as an outsourced solution. Find that vendor or that third party solution out there that can handle it for you while you gear up, while you get better at it, while you hire up or skill up to be able to address it. And this is, still a reason for, MSSPs are still a thing. They still exist. There has been, more alignment and more expectation over the past couple of years that MSPs should be taking on more responsibilities that used to be for MSSPs. And this is definitely another one of those realms where if you're having, trouble tackling this, and partnering with an MSSP is an absolute wonderful way of being able to quickly address a lot of these cloud security concerns. Again, the cloud configuration management, that takes more than a person that just knows how to use a monitoring tool. That takes somebody that knows how to manage that platform and the infrastructure. Um, it's like the difference between a help desk and a systems administrator. A help desk individual is going to have a different set of skills and experience than a full-blown systems administrator. And a full systems administrator with years of experience is going to see misconfigurations and problems in the way an environment is set up much more quickly than a help desk tech is going to. Same thing over with cloud. If you've got somebody that's never managed that particular type of cloud infrastructure, or that IaaS or PaaS, or that software as a service, whatever it may be, if you don't have anybody that has real experience managing that platform, they are going to be operating at a deficit whenever you ask them to go configure it securely. So cloud security is something that, even though there are tons of tools that do lots of great things for us on the monitoring, like Adlumen's MDR the Adlumen MDR Microsoft 365 breach prevention. That's a wonderful kind of plug and play tool. It's just it's 3 minutes to get the integration, 5 minutes to get the integration going. Your intra ID event logs and login information starts flowing, and it can go ahead and start catching impossible travel, unusual user behavior, foreign VPN sign in, all those types of things, and it can immediately reach back out into Intra and disable that user for you. And not a lot of effort or time or skill needed for the MSP. But
Real quick to
configuring
interject
it is the
here.
hard part.
Yeah, so this kind of brings up a fun point, and we'll skip a little bit further ahead in the questions if you're following along, because outsourcing was going to be something I wanted to talk about. When MSPs are deciding what to outsource, at least based on what we've seen here at Enable, and I know it's a little bit of a narrow scope, but it's a good scope nonetheless. I think 25,000 partners can't be entirely wrong. We see a lot of our more mature MSPs moving more and more off their plate. You mentioned Adlumen MDR, a phenomenally good tool. Not to plug Adlumen, I would say any MDR out there that you can have to help take some of this off your plate is good, right? We're seeing a rise in SOCs. I'm talking more and more to MSPs whose tier 1 tech support, as long as it's remote, is outsourced. I see MSPs doing what you're talking about with cloud infrastructure management being outsourced and the like. Is this something that is driven by, I don't want to say a lack of an experience or knowledge from the MSPs, but for a lack of availability of workforce? Or is this a trend we're seeing that's becoming a necessity because no one person could do this? Right? You had the benefit of being in a MSP, we'll call it pre-COVID times, right? And it was a small shop. I had the benefit of running my own single man MSP pre-COVID, and it was a single man shop. And you could find these pretty mature and pretty successful MSPs for their size that everything was in-house. Nowadays, it's very difficult to find MSPs that I think are 100% in-house. You know, I guess I'm kind of asking, like, how do you decide what we're outsourcing? How do you decide where to go? Are there any common things you see amongst these threads? And is it a market necessity nowadays because nobody can be an expert on everything?
It's a lot of those things. A lot of those things are coming into play on it. I think a few of the primary drivers on it is definitely the um, lack of workforce, lack of being able to find the individuals that can do what needs to be done, um, and in the region, in the area you need them to be in, and at a price point that you can afford them. That's the first thing that's going to be driving an MSP to say, I can't do this. But then, that's just okay, cool. So you can't hire a highly skilled individual for this. That's fine. Well, then what's the next thing you need to do? Well, if I can't hire the people to build the platform and service, can I just buy the service already built? And that's what a lot of MSPs are going for, is they're going out and consuming from specialized, it might be an MSP that's specialized, or an MSSP that is specialized in a particular element, such as cloud security, and just offloading all of that to them and letting them completely handle it. Um, the the next thing on that is margins. It's just the profitability. Even if you had the ability to hire, just to find the people with the skills and the talent you needed, and they were in the right place and they were available for you. Well, if you're going to contend with modern threat landscape and what you are expected to do as an MSP nowadays when it comes to defending your clients, you need 24/7 security operations. So even if you can find the right people, well, that means you need to have, how many people on your payroll, staffing for 24/7. You're going to need your tier ones. If you're going to build out an actual SOC, that's 2 or 3 tier ones, uh, uh, security researchers or threat analysts. You're going to have some tier twos. You'll probably have 1 or 2 of those, and then you'll have a single, tier three, principal cybersecurity researcher or threat incident responder, however you want to label them. But that's going to be a 6-person team per shift, a 5-person team per shift, and you need to staff, for 24/7. So that's 3 teams of 6 individuals on rotation for different shifts. Oh, and people have to go on vacation, and everybody can't work 7 days a week. So it's going to be more than those individuals. And that, I think, is the bigger blocker for a lot of MSPs, is that is an impossible hurdle to get over. Cloud security absolutely took 24/7 vigilance to protect it, even whenever it first came about. If you move stuff in the cloud, that means it's always available. That means anybody can be attacking it at any time. Um, that hasn't gone away. That's never going to go away. That is the truth of cloud services. It's even the truth for a lot of your internal stuff now. It's still always available and still can always be reached by a threat actor if they're going to leverage vulnerabilities or take advantage of misconfigurations, incorrect ports being set up, incorrect services being allowed to run, things like that. you can just always find yourself in the situation of, we need to go to 24/7, but we can't go to 24/7 because of, well, honestly, we can't afford $2 million in payroll over the next 2 years. And that necessitates, by design, you either have to make that decision of, I am not going to pursue this, and I'm going to leave these opportunities available for others. And depending on how your MSP is built and the business model, and whether you're building your MSP out as a lifestyle MSP or you're building it out for mergers and acquisitions, that can be a good decision to make, that you're going to leave those opportunities for others. But if you want to grow, if you want to succeed, if you want to not be left behind, it needs to be something that you have to add into your portfolio, however you can do it. And again, about the only way most MSPs can do that today is by engaging with a third party. And there's nothing to feel bad about there, because I remember you talked about pre-COVID, everybody kept everything internally because, well, even then, I think the concept of what needed to be done to protect the cloud, even back then, people really didn't, not everybody got it then. And it's not really changed. It's just the scale of it has changed. You're going to run into it with every client now. It's not just the one or two or three big ones that could afford um, the more expensive Microsoft licensing or a cloud hosted solution somewhere. It's now all of your current customers and your potential future customers operate within these realms. And there's a lot of opportunity there that if you're not going to engage with it, somebody else will. Can you afford that?
Yeah, and kind of some flavor to this. Um, I forget the source I was reading, but it was right in the middle of COVID and this transition to kind of remote workers. There was a article I found, I believe it was off of Channel E to E, talking about 75% of the workforce went remote. Right. I look at that statistic and I go, okay, who are our essential workers? Doctors, nurses, electricians, you know, uh, anybody providing, I would say, I don't want to say blue collar services, but like those infrastructure services that are necessary to run, right? You can't take people out of a water plant. It's not going to happen. You can't take people out of a power plant or linemen off the line. And I look at that 75% and go, well, those necessary jobs are probably close to 15% of the workforce, right? You're telling me of that remaining 80 per, or 85%, that almost 100% of them are now remote. And I think MSPs felt the brunt of that. And I think that's kind of where we were forced to change very, very quickly. So you talk about this footprint expanding. I don't know if it quite expanded more as it exploded. And the offshoot of this, kind of where I wanted to add this, you talked about this stigma. I think some of us that are more old school have that stigma still, but I look at some of the fastest growing MSPs and the most successful retention wise MSPs that I've talked to over the past year and a half, 2 years, since COVID kind of settled. And we're now in what I would say is a bit more of a status quo type environment. Um, Highest retention and return rate that I saw from an MSP was at a 98.5% gross, right? Which is, I mean, just off the charts. They outsourced MDR, they outsourced part of cloud infrastructure, and then weirdly enough, they also outsourced part of their automation, where they had a third party that was exceptionally efficient and exceptionally experienced at cloud management. They paid for them to come in and say, look, here's what we used to do on physical environments. Here's what we want to do on the cloud. Can we do it better? Right. And you look at those three things. I think those are three things that as MSPs, we might have been very proud of. Right. I look at one of the fastest growing MSPs that I've met in the past 3 years. They went from 1.5 million ARR to close to 35 in about 2.5 years. And when you look at their sales structure and you look at their company structure, they don't handle tier one support. That is completely outsourced, right? Yes, they have to handle on-site, but to talk to their support staff, it's tier two or tier three. They have a single security analyst and kind of consultant style CS, chief security officer, CSO on staff, but most of that is outsourced as well. And when I look at these two MSPs and how they're able to achieve such amazing statistics, it's that they've consolidated their business's management to so few points that they are exceptional in and gone, okay, I'm not an expert here. I need experts. What can I do to find them? And that seems to be something that MSPs that are good have grasped, but MSPs that are still trying to get to that best in class state still struggle with a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that something you're seeing as well when we talk about this outsourcing, or is it just, folks, regardless of where they sit, kicking and screaming, maybe going into this outsourcing world?
I think, particularly for MSPs, I think it's driven by a few base things. One of them is if you wound up at an MSP, if chances are you're technically inclined, you like puzzles, you like problem solving, you love being given the black box of a problem and being left to figure it out. Pretty much most MSPs, you can come in with a problem, drop it in front of them, and tell them there's no time limit here, there's no time concerns, and they can figure it out. They can put the time and the effort. The people are talented, they're smart, they can figure it out. That's not good business, though. And I think that's the big thing for a lot of MSPs is making the distinction and setting up guardrails for themselves on the what is being a clever technician or a clever engineering solution versus what is a scalable, practical, and margin increasing solution for our situation. Because those are going to be vastly different scenarios. One is somebody spends the next 3 weeks researching, prototyping, building things out. Cool, we got our first proof of concept. Now let's spend another 3 or 4 months or 6 months refining before we can push into production. And then, we're still could be months away from any profitability or even years away from profitability versus let's just consume this as a service and you're already at profitability, from step one pretty much because you have your margin, built into that already and you're making, 20, 30%, 40%, 60, 200%, what's your market going to bear? But you're already in the revenue, profit generation phase. You're not, just worried about, what's the cash flow look like and can this continue to support us growing this before we can start making profit off of it? And that drives a lot of the other downstream things that you were talking about there for MSPs making those decisions. A lot of that is making sure that you're not letting I hate to say pride, but be careful not to let your pride and your capabilities to figure it out override a better business practice. That's what I think stops a lot of MSPs that could be really successful from growing. It's not that they aren't successful, it's just that they can't grow anymore because if you're going to do it internally, you have scaling issues, you have staffing issues, you have your operational overhead, your fully burdened employee labor cost, your insurance, your all of those things you're having to account for. And a lot of times MSPs don't account for all those things when they're trying to, calculate and figure out what their true margins are. There's just so much better opportunities now for MSPs to move these things out to outservice solutions to other MSPs, MSSPs, cloud service vendors that will handle these things for you around cloud security. Because if you just think payroll costs, think about how much your tier one help desk individual cost, your individual that's going to be able to handle this type of stuff for you if you wanted to do it all in house. It's probably going to cost you 3 to 4 times what that person's going to cost you.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the things I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head head here with is MSPs in the past have prided themselves on being a market that is very agile and very easy to evolve, right? The reason we are as a market taking over internal IT for enterprise level companies as co-managed deals is, you know, as an offshoot of COVID, everybody learned how quickly we can move, right? I go to internal IT events, and not to say that these folks aren't doing good work or the best they can, but I hear things of like, I still patch once a quarter, right? Whereas I go to the MSP space and I hear people talking about statistics of, you know, on from a vulnerability being published to exploited, it's 15 days on average, right? And that 15 days takes into account, you know, me and you, not to say that we couldn't do it in less than 15 days, but we're probably not, compared to the folks that have commoditized ransomware or commoditized malicious attacks that are probably doing this in 24 hours or less, right? But I digress. What I mean to say here is we need to take pride still in that ease of evolution and how agile our businesses are, but look at transferring this from our internal, you know, I plant my flag, I'm here style pride to I can provide the best services regardless of vendor, regardless of provider, regardless of whoever's looking at this, because I think we're being more and more hired to be VCIOs.
Yeah.
If we take that mentality to it, you know, internal's good, but if we can find a better resource somewhere else, we still need that because it allows us to evolve quicker, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and that being able to evolve is really important whenever it comes to the cloud infrastructure management and cloud security and secure posture management and everything, because these are things that once a vulnerability, like you said, 15 days, that's for a publicly disclosed vulnerability, a non-publicly disclosed vulnerability, or a vulnerability that's not already been taken advantage of. Most of the time, there are a significant number of vulnerabilities already being taken advantage of against these, cloud services, um, before you even know about it. One of the, and no way for you to deal with it. So things like whenever Microsoft M365 had their breach a year and a half ago, because of some compromised signing keys that a threat actor was able to get their hands on from an internal intrusion to some test systems. Well, they turned around and used that to access M365. That is one of the things, within the realm of cloud security that you should, as an MSP, be responsible for. You should be owning that. But this is one of those cases of there's nothing you could have done at that point. And that's another thing with cloud services is sometimes there are threats and attacks that you simply cannot defend against, and you must be able to detect, respond to, and recover from. And that's, I think, another bigger missing section of the story, is, and I mean, that's, uh, you can say that that's actually a missing part of the story a lot of time for MSPs. The thing they don't talk about a lot is, well, when something does happen, what does that look like? How do we recover from it? How do we respond? How do we, take our lessons learned and improve on it? Now, a lot of that what you know and you've learned over the years goes out the window whenever it's cloud, because you don't control everything and it's new configurations. You may have spent your whole life administrating Windows systems, and now you're over in cloud and you're being asked to manage things that are running on Linux in the back end. It is a
Yeah, but
paradigm
Lewis,
shift.
it's the cloud. I can just blow it up and start all over again.
Well, true. Well, that is one of the nicer things, is you can do that a lot of times, and that's not a bad option. Sometimes actually is, whenever, if you're taking ownership over a cloud configuration, over a cloud implementation, it is worth spending the time asking, why was it done? Who set this up? What was the purpose of it? What are the business deliverables and expectations out of this? Because it may have been set up to be functional, but not to be secure, nor to provide true benefits to the business. A lot of times things get moved to the cloud, and for the employees, for the end user, it's the exact same workflow for them. Nothing's changed. They're still going through the same things, still accessing stuff and using it the same ways, just through the cloud instead of through a file share locally. Um, it's worth looking in there for is that a possibility? Can we just, you know, download the data or secure all the data, wipe the entire instance, wipe the entire configuration, and start from the beginning, following best practices and following like a STIG manual or another piece of or secure configuration benchmarking, such as, something comes from Microsoft provides those for their cloud services. CIS, Center for Internet Security, they provide benchmarks for everything from Windows OSs up to cloud services, AWS, Azure. Follow those guidelines and those benchmarks for the initial implementation. Instead of trying to untie the knot that somebody else already tied, can you just grab a new piece of rope and tie a new secure, proper knot where you need it to be? Um, it's definitely an option. And I think more MSPs should be comfortable with that approach, because there's just so much hidden debt that you inherit sometimes, a technical debt, security debt that comes with taking over something that somebody else set up and configured. And yes, it might take more time. It may extend the onboarding of the client. May have to sit there and figure out, how do we account for the additional labor that's going to go into this? But the long-term benefits are worth it, because you're not going to have, those ticking time bombs sleeping there waiting for somebody to take advantage of them. Or oops, you're using Intra ID and the new feature that replaces the service accounts. You decide that you're going to set up those new service accounts, but yet Microsoft has this vulnerability there that means that those accounts can be taken advantage of to be used to create other new privileged accounts. So there's a vulnerability chain that just, lets a person move from one small thing to another small thing to another small thing until they get to, oh, I now have enterprise admin domain credentials for your Intra ID environment. And those are all things that are just, if you never knew about it in the first place, you would have never looked to see if it was configured correctly. You would have never have looked to see what accounts have been created through that methodology. And if you're not monitoring the events in the cloud, if somebody starts using it and taking advantage of it, you're missing out on the signals that it's happening. So from the beginning of not knowing that it's set up incorrectly, to not knowing that somebody's taking advantage of the fact that it's not set up correctly, to somebody actually causing damage in the environment because of it, are all things that a lot of MSPs just unfortunately do miss. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this, is that you can't be afraid to own this problem. If you're afraid to own this problem, then your clients are either going to assume that, okay, well, it must not be that important because you're not addressing it. You're not trying to get me to do anything with it. And then also you yourself are missing out on the billing opportunities. You're missing out on the additional stickiness. You're missing out on additional revenue. And also, I've always said, if you aren't having a conversation with your client about X subject, somebody else is going to have that conversation with them at some point. And at that point, you have lost the narrative. And once you lose the narrative, it's always hard to get it back under your control. So even if you are not comfortable with managing the cloud security for your clients, again, you can make that decision, make it as a business decision, and then say, well, okay, how am I going to make sure that the business doesn't miss out on the opportunity?
Yeah, and so kind of attacking this, do we have any, and I know this is going to be a general question, but everybody wants to ask it, right? What are some best practices for MSPs as they're making this transition to the cloud, or have already made this transition to the cloud, and they're looking at protecting and securing these cloud resources? Is there any, good advice you could give them, or any best practices you could give them?
First is, don't be afraid to blow it all up and start over again. Because if you're comfortable enough to blow it all up and start it up again because you know and understand it, you're going to set it up more securely and configure it correctly. So first is just don't be afraid to start over. Then after that, I think it would be in priority of first, principles of least privilege. Every user, every service, every application account, minimum access that's required to do the job. If all it needs is to pull information, then it doesn't need to have the ability to put or write. Whenever we're talking about API access, so that means, taking and setting up first, doing the initial review and audit of the environment. Who are the admins who need admin accounts? Okay, make sure these are the only people that have them. Make sure everybody else has regular user accounts. And then set up a regular access review and, automated monitoring of those users. So that would be your identity IAMs, your M365 breach prevention that we have with AdLumen, anything like that. Then next would probably be, just good old fashioned defense in depth. You're not going to solve your cloud problems with one tool or one thing. It's going to cover the gambit from network segmentation whenever you're setting up those virtual networks, making sure that things are segmented properly, making sure you got endpoint protection running on any of those OSs that are running in the cloud, proper data encryption, also access control lists for being able to get into the administrator backend, web application firewalls sitting in front of your workloads, or even cloud workload protection platforms that are out there that exist. And while you're doing all those things, making sure that they're all being automated as much as you can. And I think the final two items would be making sure that there is business continuity planning in place along with just the disaster recovery elements. Because almost everybody's going to have a plan for, okay, if this goes down, we've got backup somewhere. But not often enough is the conversation about, well, how does the business continue to operate while we don't have access to this? I always advocate for, you need pen and paper fallbacks for everything. I'm not saying that you need to, build your business so that you can run it off of pen and paper, because you're gonna, that's not efficient, that's not scalable. But you do need to have, whenever everything, when all of your IT systems go down and are not available, you still need to have contact information. You still need to know who needs to be called. You still need to know, if you're providing services to a client that does refrigerated shipping, you know, if IT goes down, does that mean those trucks are stuck where they are at and somebody has to keep gassing them up to keep the fridges running, but yet they're not going to make the delivery, so you're going to lose the sales? Is that what you're looking at, or do you have the pen and paper backup to still be able to push those deliveries out to get that food where it needs to go so that you can make the delivery, if and hopefully if not get paid, then at least services are delivered and you'll get your money eventually. um
I would
that
I
level
would
of
tack
business
on
continuity.
Yeah, I would tack on to that business continuity thing as well, because I know, like you said, a lot of MSPs kind of have some of this in place. Practice it,
Yes.
simulate it, make sure what you have in place is good. Because I can't tell you how many MSPs I've talked to. Oh, I have this particular process in place in the event of a disaster. It's like, okay, great. How often have you practiced it? Well, when we put it together. Okay, that was, you told me 5 years ago, right? To kind of make a joke about this, I compare this to a brick and mortar building where every 6 months in the US, you have to practice a fire drill, which is walking in a straight line out a door. There might be some steps in the way or stairs in the way. If, as grown adults, we have to practice that, how much more complicated is your business continuity and disaster recovery plan? Why aren't we practicing it? And it doesn't have to be once a month. I'd like to see it be once a quarter. But even if it's once a year, make sure that the plan you have is modern. Make sure that the plan you have is well managed, and then practice, because you don't want something to happen and have people running around like chickens with their heads cut off. That's the end user's job. That's not your employee's job as the MSP. Your employee's job, or your job as the MSP, is to be the cool, calm, collected, hey, we got this voice of reason.
Yeah. Your team needs to be able to respond with urgency, not panic. They can't figure out what they're doing in the middle of doing it during an emergency, and the only way that that's going to come about is through practice. So yeah, dry runs, parallel recovery, um, pull the cord tests. Whatever you can fit in, whatever works for that client's business, definitely should be part of what you're doing. And this is part of, I was having a conversation earlier this week about, how and why are some MSPs able to get, $300 a seat? Whenever, this particular MSP I was talking to, they felt like it was pulling teeth and they were never going to be able to get more than $75 per endpoint for their services where they were. And this is part of, well, you need to start including this. You need to start including cloud security. You need to be including business continuity and testing. You need to take on the role of the CISO. You need to be much more involved with your client's business operations and your client's business operations success if you want to get up to those, $300 per seat that some MSPs are able to charge. They're not charging it for patching and AV and help desk support. They're doing a lot of stuff to justify that dollar amount.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And Stephanie hit on the head with this a good amount, right? You need to be providing adequate services to prove value, but we're not selling on services anymore. We're selling on value, right? We're selling on, if your business goes down, here's my, say mean time to restoration, right? Or my restoration point timeframes, right? This is why you're paying me that $300 a seat when a natural disaster happens. So long as all of your employees are safe and able to work, we can get you up and running, barring anything weird, in 24, 48, 72 hours a week, right? You can have these objectives set out, well planned, and more businesses, I feel, are learning that that is the necessary item not just the, oh, can you keep my devices healthy every day of the week? It's, I'm also paying you for contractual, black and white, like, continuity and security and statistics, right?
Yeah.
You have MSPs that are now, instead of selling software, selling off of revenue, right? And I used to do this. My value was, by the end of the first quarter or halfway through the second quarter, you've paid for me for the year. What are you going to do with that extra money? But also, the reason you're paying for me is the productivity and peace of mind I provide, right? And pre-COVID, I was at $225 to $250 a seat, right? If I'm able to do it as a single man shop, other MSPs are, but I had that value backing. Now, I cheated a little bit. I sat next to you for part of it, right? I sat next to Eric Harless for a little bit of it, right? I had those resources and that knowledge around me, but I also wasn't afraid to swallow my pride and go, Lewis, I don't know the answer to this. I can't solve this problem. Or Eric, how would I do this in a disaster recovery? What process would you use? Right? I wasn't afraid to let others come in and show me how it's done.
Right.
Right.
The importance of peerage. And that's just like with anything for MSPs, if you're going into a new venture, if you're going into a new service, especially for cloud services, if you don't have the talent in house, is have those peer conversations. Whether it's like enables, if you're fortunate enough to attend Empower, or Inform in Australia coming up in a week or two, or any other of the many, many peer groups that are available out there that you go engage with directly. Take advantage of the fact there are people there that have already figured this out and have already figured out in a way and that they can make good margins on it.
Yeah,
There's
very rarely do MSPs invent the wheel.
Yeah, no, they're not.
Right.
They're not doing anything new. They are MSPs are typically really good at taking the things that other people have spent a lot of hard time and effort figuring out and setting up and implementing, and looking at it through the MSP lens and saying, well, you know what, I can make it even 8 times more efficient. I can make it 10 times more scalable, because that's where your skill set is usually. One more thing I did leave off a while ago on what should MSPs be doing, if they're starting, best practices. I also, the last ones is continuous monitoring with pen testing. More so than anything else, cloud services, cloud infrastructure is subject to the 24/7, always on, always available. And that means that anything can happen to them at any time. You can't, this isn't you defer it till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whenever somebody gets in and checks tickets. Cloud is something where somebody needs to be able to, at 3 o'clock in the morning, respond within, through automated solutions, respond in, 2 minutes. And for, investigator led or incident responder led actions, things that need to happen in 15, 30 minutes. The days of being able to have somebody on your team on call to deal with alerts after hours really doesn't work anymore the way it used to. Lateral movement, breakout events, according to, I would believe it was CrowdStrike's most recent threat report they put out. They had their lowest breakout times from one system being affected to lateral movement to another system is like under a minute, is the fastest one they saw. Ransomware attacks and payloads are, being done in minutes, not days. Now, the old adage of a threat actor can compromise your environment and have persistence and be there for months before you ever see them, that doesn't happen the way that it used to. It still happens. It's part of, access brokerage, initial access brokerage. There are threat groups out there that the only thing they do is get access to systems and turn around and sell that access. But once the person buys that access, they're usually working on timetables of minutes or hours before they're doing damage. And as an MSP, that threat nowadays is large enough, it is prominent enough, it is, just the prevalence of it is great enough that 24/7 is table stakes nowadays for alerting and monitoring. So cloud security, if nothing else, is one of the first things you should be implementing 24/7 monitoring and alerting for if you don't have true 24/7 operations. Outsource it. Find a solution or a partnership that's going to be able to let you hit that 24/7 awareness and monitoring and initial triage and remediation for those events that are happening in the cloud. And then following it up with, there should always also be pen testing as part of that, or security assessments. There are tools available out there that are free. Scuba is one of them. This is something that was produced by the Microsoft security teams, I believe. And it's just a PowerShell script that you can grab and go run against your Microsoft tenants to find the misconfigurations. No cost. It just takes your time to go do it. But operationalizing that and scaling it over time, it's easy enough to have somebody spend an hour doing this for you on the team, but operationalizing that and starting to turn a margin on it, you're going to want to automate that. And that might be another one of those things where consuming a service with underneath, there might be a license cost associated with it, but just consuming the service might just be, more profitable, more quickly, more scalable for you.
Well, that's kind of, that callback to things we've missed. Is there anything else there that you think we need to discuss before we look at kind of tying a nice, neat little bow on this and saying, Lewis, I think I've taken too much of your time?
I think first is know that the gap is only going to widen. So with the introduction of AI and machine learning and agentic AI models, and just think of them as other more efficient tools to do the job. It's not even that they're necessarily that they're AI, but that they're so much more efficient, more scalable solutions, that the days of somebody reviewing logs on a Friday afternoon to catch security events is gone. You should still be reviewing them, but that's not how you're going to catch threats. That's not how it's going to happen anymore. Our State of the SOC report that we did earlier this year, which was based on, I believe, just like 2 months of telemetry and events from us at Adlumen, on the MDR side, it was like 42% of all telemetry for security events came from the cloud. The rest of them came from internal. So that's like half of your opportunities to catch and detect a threat is coming from the cloud. And the volume of those and just think about it in the practical sense of going from, okay, I'm going to manually review logs with my eyeballs to catch something that may be off, to I need to automate the ingestion of all of these events to somewhere. Now that I have them automated for all these events to be ingested somewhere from the cloud, now I need to parse that, and I need to parse it and review it with updated rules and detections that are having to come from threat intelligence feed and data science rules that are being written by humans and AI models and machine learning. And I have to take these Sigma rules and bring them down and import them into whatever it is I have parsing these events. And then I need to create, just that little part there is a team of humans to do that. It's not a single person job. It is a team of humans to do that. And with the introduction of the AI tooling into that, that is just making that difference between you manually doing it and a team doing it backed up by these AI empowered tools. That gulf is just getting so wide that the longer you take to get on board with some of these things, the wider that breadth is going to be. And at some point, I don't want to say at some point is the gap too big to fill, but it's going to become more challenging for you to fill. Also, like everything else, the more you're supporting, the more complex it's going to be. The more complex it's going to be, the higher the cost is going to be driven up, the more chances there are for you to miss things. Like with everything else, standardization. Can you get your clients standardizing on certain cloud services infrastructure? You don't have to worry about managing and updating 30 different sets of rules and behaviors. It's all just one. And then regulatory and data sovereignty are going to be the things that are going to pressure this. You may be avoiding it now. If you're an MSP and you're avoiding tackling this right now because your clients aren't asking for it, well, one, missed opportunity for you to educate your clients on what they need. But eventually they are going to make the decision that this is stuff that needs to be dealt with because of the regulatory, insurance, data sovereignty, data privacy legislations that's going to compel them. And if you're not, again, back to if you're not owning the conversation today, if you're not controlling the narrative, they're going to have that conversation with somebody else. And then you're going to all of a sudden find yourself in a situation because you weren't talking about this. Your client comes up and says, hey, we've hired this third party to handle our cloud security. We need you to give them all of our information. And that's those are the situations as an MSP you want to avoid at all costs.
Well, Lewis, I do really appreciate your time. Again, I think I've taken too much of it. And you've probably opened up like 5 or 6 other podcasts we need to talk about some of this with. But it's been a pleasure to have you here today. And I very much hope to have you back on. For those that may have any follow-up questions or anything like that, how can folks reach out to you? And if so, how?
So you can always reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn under The Security Pope, or you can reach me at Enable, Lewis, LEWIS.Pope at n-able.com. And you can catch me on Twitch every once in a while doing some live coding if that's your interest, also underneath The Security Pope.
Sounds like we've got a good avenue to reach out for anything we need. Again, it's been a pleasure to have you here today, and we'll look forward to talking to you later.
All right. Always a pleasure, Joe.